No, I'm not Jim. I'm not. I don't even look like him, do I? You know, they let him go have a vacation. He's flying off to France, and he's leaving us here to do all the hard work. So, no, a much-deserved vacation, but it's really good to see so many of you folks show up here. And welcome. I think fall's finally here and on its way, so I'm glad to be here. I'll be chairing today in Jim's absence. So I'm going to begin the meeting because we have a really full agenda, so I'm going to get us going here. So I'll call this to order, and I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda as it stands.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. This is a public invitation now to any interested persons who wish to address the Transportation Advisory Board. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes, and the presentation did anyone sign up that we know of? Is there anyone in the audience? Seeing none, we will move on with the agenda. The next part is the report of the chair, and the only thing I have to report from Chair Jim Hovland is that Gary Hansen is now the STA rep. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. So.
Yeah, not to confuse people, but I was asked if I'd be willing to change hats or play musical chairs, whichever you prefer, and continue on tab. I have been representing Metro Cities. Burnsville Councilmember Dan Keeley has been the STA rep, and Dan made a decision to discontinue those responsibilities, and I do want to thank Dan for his service and his advocacy on behalf of STA, as well as the understanding of Metro Cities in allowing me to make this change. So I am now the STA rep.
Well, we're glad to have you here, whatever hat you wear.
Well, thank you. And Mayor Drosky here is the Metro Cities alternate here today.
Yes, yes. Good to see you both. Thank you. So we'll move on then to the agency reports. We'll start with MnDOT. I see that Mr. Mike Barnes is here. Please.
Madam Chair, I don't have anything specific for today unless there's questions.
Are there any questions? Anybody wants any updates or information? I don't see anyone. So is Todd Bewan, please?
Yep, thank you,
MPCA.
Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Report out from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is mostly with regard to the Climate Action Framework. So a few months ago, we were here and gave a short presentation on the coming of the Climate Action Framework. It was released last Friday at an event with the governor and lieutenant governor, and it was at the Ecolab headquarters. This is a concerted effort on the part of state agencies working with partners to put a plan in place for our climate work going forward. Maybe the thing that I'll just focus on is that the framework is organized around 6 goals. Clean transportation is one of them. Clean transportation is at the top, followed by climate, smart, natural, and working lands, resilient communities, clean energy and efficient buildings, healthy lives in communities, and clean economy. So there are a number of things there that relate to our work. So I wanted to highlight that. The report can be found at MnDOT.gov/framework. And it's a 70-page document and with a lot of detail with goals and measures related to all 6 of those areas. So I just wanted to let folks know that it is out there and it's viewable. One other thing that is available, if you have connections to local units of government, less than 10,000 population, we currently have planning grants available that are available for folks in resiliency, actually looking at resiliency of small communities and what they might do to sort of look at their infrastructure and upgrade that. But we do have grants available for that, so those can be found on our MPCA website as well. That's all I have.
Nice. Oh, nice. Questions or comments? Okay, I see none. So next is Mr. Crimmins, Mac.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few points about the airport. As everybody, I'm sure, understands, the airlines are picking up business. They're about 90%, 85 to 90% of the 2019 levels. And there's 34 airlines now that are licensed to fly out of MSP, both Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. Some of the interesting facts, TNCs, Transportation Network Companies, would be the biggest players are Uber and Lyft. We have 28,000 licenses rented out to TNCs as of last month. So there's 28,000 people coming to the airport, dropping off, picking up. And the year of 22, the trip fee was $3.42 for a pickup or a drop-off. So even though there's a lot of people out there, it's quite active. The next biggest one was Turo. This is a new one that's gaining ground fast. They're a peer-to-peer car rental company. That would be you renting your car to somebody coming into the airport. You would drop your car off, and you email them, you tell them where the car is, they pick it up, they pay you. They don't pay a company, they pay the person. And we have an agreement with them. We gave them a temporary agreement for 1 year to work at the airport. We had to assign them a space. And now that it's becoming very successful, it doesn't seem like it's going away. So now we're going to have to sit down and have a licensing agreement with them over long term, maybe a 4 or 5 year agreement. But that's picking up. And I think that's why car rentals, the Hertz's and the other ones, are they're at 35% of 2019. They're 35% behind the 2019 level. And I think that's because the TNCs are picking up and Turo's nibbling away at them. So the old method of renting a car seems to have gone by. Everybody's going by their phone now. I mean, we have 91% of the concession stands are open for business, and we're trying to get more all the time. We've been having job fairs. We've had 8 job fairs at the airport in 21 and now in 22, and we got another one coming up in a month. The last job fair, there was 450 job seekers that showed up looking for work. So they're becoming very successful, and we're going to continue having these job fairs until we get full employment, because some of the concessionaires are not opening 100% of the time because of lack of employees. So that's a big hassle. The other thing we're doing, the hotel, the International Continental Hotel, is at 85% of the 2019 level. And the last 2 months, they were above the 2019 levels. So the hotel is finally recouping and going back into business full-time, and they're very happy about that. The bond sales, we had bond sales. This is an interesting fact. We had bond sales, and we sold $370 million in bonds. But we had 94 institutional investors bid on $2.75 billion worth of bonds. So that's how much interest there was. The bonds were going at 4.3% interest, and we had to turn back. Naturally, we had to turn away a lot of bidders because we only sold the 300 and some million. 98 million is repaying old debt, and the rest of it's going to be for new construction that's coming up. Delta's going to be remodeling the G Concourse, the entire G Concourse. And the airport and Delta are going to partner together in that so that airport's infrastructure can be done at the same time that Delta's doing remodeling, so we don't have to shut down the G Concourse twice. We're going to try to do it all at the same time. And Sun Country at Terminal 2 is set to break their all-time record this year in 22 for flights. Sun Country's been picking up a lot of new destinations and a lot of new airplanes. So they're flying, they're quite successful right now. They're moving well into the future. And I think that's about all I have. Oh, cab use is up 29% over 2021 levels. So the cab drivers are starting to come back also. And I think that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Are there questions or comments? I was going to ask about that G Concourse. First of all, it needs a redo, but where are the planes and the gates going to go? Are you going to shove them over to the other airport, or how are we going to?
No, they'll do it in stages where certain gates will stay open. They may do the A, B, and C concourse first, the smaller planes,
Okay.
do part of them, and then they'll sort of leapfrog it. You know, right now, they're in the position of hiring a construction manager and to set a plan out. We're gonna be meeting on Monday, and the staff will be presenting a plan to the commission to let us know exactly how they're gonna perform this. They don't wanna shut down naturally, because that's a lot of lost income.
Oh, that's what I
So,
wondered.
and loss of customers, so they won't do that. So they'll have a plan worked out.
So we'll have a time frame next time, probably?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Other questions or comments about that? It's nice to hear, good news to hear. We have the Met Council, Deb Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things today. So first, I want to mention that we launched, or Metro Transit launched Metro Transit Micro on September 10th. The service delivers an app-based on-demand service to improve connections in North Minneapolis. This is a one-year pilot program to connect riders primarily to the C line and will expand overall accessibility within the service area. We are really excited to have this service in this community, and I think it gives us this model to see how we can replicate it in other areas of the region going forward. One other thing we're doing is the first meeting of the Transportation Equity Work Group is happening this week. The goal of this group is to conduct a study that is an equity evaluation of regional transportation investment. A work group has been assembled and is being, along with the Center for Economic Inclusion, who helped organize who the work group members would be. And what they're doing is preparing recommendations on transportation investment. Final recommendation of the work group will ultimately come to the council and to MnDOT for implementation. The study will take about 18 months, with recommendations being put forward in spring of 2024. We're also continuing discussions on the route of the Blue Line extension. There are a few more community workshops on the 28th and 29th to discuss route options. Information is available on the project website if you're interested in participating. If you can't make it to one of the meetings, we're also taking feedback through an online survey, which is open until September 30th. And then lastly, for very exciting news, we are getting ready for a big project on the east side. As you know, the Gold Line is planned to serve St. Paul, Maplewood, Landfall, Oakdale, and Woodbury, and we're excited to announce that construction is starting, and the official groundbreaking will be October 19th at 10 a.m. in Maplewood, and we'll make sure the information gets out to this group on that.
How exciting for that, another one. Okay. Questions, comments for Met Council? I see none, so STA, Gary, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Relative to fixed route services, Maple Grove's U of M ridership is greater than pre-COVID, and the Minneapolis Express service is rebounding with an increase in park and ride usage. MBTA set several ridership records in August with its highest overall monthly ridership total since the beginning of the pandemic. Relative to microtransit, Maple Grove's MyRide continues to have strong ridership, matching pre-COVID levels. Southwest Transit's Southwest Prime continues to grow. MBTA Connect set another monthly record, leading MBTA to review expansion opportunities in the near future with additional vehicles and hours. State fare services provided by Southwest Transit more than doubled last year's ridership. They provided about 77% of 2019 ridership. MBTA's state fare ridership resulted in the second highest all-time total, second only to 2019. Services being provided for special events. Both Southwest Transit and MBTA are offering services to Gophers and Vikings games. Also, MBTA is providing Renaissance Festival service out of Marshall Road Transit Station in Shakopee. And in other news, Southwest Transit partnered with District 287 to hire a student to help in the maintenance department. District 287 serves unique learners of 11 member school districts in the West Metro. And Southwest Transit hopes to continue this partnership and add more students to the program in the future. So that is my update.
Well, that sounds really great that you're helping out the schools with the students. Other questions or concerns, anything? Okay. Well, that concludes the agency reports, so we'll move on to the TAC report. That's John. Are you ready for us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In the benefit of brevity, I think I'll just go over the fact that TAC did receive all the items that are in front of you tonight or today for action items. The one item I will cover is the TAC bylaws, and of course, I think you all remember I've talked about that several times here over the past year. We met initially, I think, in February to discuss TAC bylaws, made some significant changes. Then the legal department looked at it and said, well, there's some more changes you need to make. And then upon receiving those back, the TAC did see some other improvements that could be made. Specifically about, we had some changes in leadership of our subcommittees, and it wasn't exactly clear who could hold those positions. So the latest version you see in front of you really is the change that allows TAC members and alternates to be chairs of the various committees. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd stand for any questions.
Other questions on the bylaws? I'm not seeing any. Good luck on finishing that up with legal. The next item is approval of the minutes from August 17, 2022. Can I get a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any comments, corrections? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have the consent calendar. Now, we usually move these as a slate, so I'm going to ask for just a brief summary of these. I'm hoping everybody had a chance to review a lot of these. Some of them are pretty standard, so I'll ask for the brief summary, and then if anyone wants to pull one out, they can let us know after the summary, and we'll pull it aside and discuss it further. Please, John.
Thank you, Chair. And so starting with the first one, 22-35 Hennepin Avenue BRT platforms. First and foremost, what most folks need to know on this one is that the project is being separated out due to a NEPA concern of including the street project with the transit project, and so it really is a requirement of Federal Highway Administration. The second one, 22-36, Bruce Bento Trail Extension, and really, again, on this one, is the amendment to add the preliminary engineering for the Bruce Bento Trail. So again, the piece is really to make sure that there is engineering prior to the trail moving forward. And again, this is the Ramsey County had received that federal congressionally directed funding for that portion. So and then the next project, as I kind of go back and forth, this isn't as easy as it was at home when I had 3 monitors. 22-37, the Coon Rapids Boulevard signal system is, again, here, recommended adoption of, to add the mill and overlay and turn lane to Anoka County's CASA 1 project. And again, this request is really, it's administrative, so back up here a little bit, is that they had received HSIP funds for a project, and now this is really about making sure that change in cost is reflected in the TIP when they added the mill and overlay, the local project portions to that. So not any change to the federal funds, just adding that state portion. The next project is 22-38. And again, now this one is a request and adoption to change the termini and add the retaining wall and increase the cost of Ramsey County's Highway 36 reconstruction project. And for those that weren't familiar, really, it's just logical tie-down points for where the construction can or needs to take place. And so adding those pieces in, and that changes the project from $3.3 million to $4.3 million to reflect that. And again, this project is not connected to the regional solicitation, so not, again, through TAB's funding that's awarded. And then the next project, 22-39, is Southwest Transit's mobility hubs. And this one, project was originally awarded regional solicitation funds in 2018, so 4 years ago. And this is really to add the project to the 23 to 26 STIP to make sure that all the work can be completed. As I look at this again, it just needs to be added to the TIP, right? And then I think, does that get me through the, again?
Yeah.
All right, there we go. Any questions?
So does anyone want to move any one of these out of the consent calendar? I'm just looking around to see if anybody needed a further explanation. I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to entertain a motion to move the slate of items 1 through 5 on the consent business calendar.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, all those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. This carries. Thank you, John. That made your job easy this time. Non-consent business, we're going to start, number 1 is the 2022-31 Unified Planning Work Program. John, you're back up here.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I will introduce this one, and then I'll turn it over to David Burns, who from staff has done the work on this. But really, the UPWP for everybody is the Met Council's application for federal planning funds. And the UPW contains all those projects in which they are using federal funds. And it's a 80-20 match? 80-20 match, I got that right. And so 80% federal, 20% local funds that fund those projects. And with that, I will turn it over to David.
Welcome, Mr. Burns.
Great. Thank you very much. I figured this is been a while since it's been in person, but okay, it looks like this keyboard works. So as John mentioned, I'm just going to provide like a brief overview of the content, some of the planning studies from 2022, and those that will begin in 2023, and give an overview of the budget. So as John mentioned, this is required by federal law for all MPOs, and ultimately it stems from the goals and objectives in our 2040 TPP, as well as addressing pressing issues and concerns expressed by our local planning partners. And it really serves to outline and detail the work activities that we will perform over the course of 2023. So really it describes our transportation planning activities, our studies, and our budget. And as John mentioned, this is an application we must submit to FHWA and FTA to receive federal transportation planning funds. So if you look through the document, you'll see that it's organized by 6 major categories as seen on the left. Each category includes a calculation of total staff time and the associated cost, consultant time and cost, expenditures and total cost for projects within the category. So in total, in 2023, our consulting budget will exceed $2 million. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but as you can see, each one, like activity A, has staff weeks, associated budget, and studies and associated budget for a total cost per category. So as you can see, these are our planning studies from 2022 that will continue into 2023. And there's a lot of them. I just want to point out here that there's a lot that's started in 2022 or will start in 2022, and we will not have a lot of capacity in 2023 to add new work. So we do have 4 studies slated to begin in 2023. One that I'll press upon a little bit is the Regional Solicitation Evaluation. So this was last done 10 years ago in conjunction with Thrive. And this is going to be a 3-year study to connect the solicitation with the Regional Development Guide and our Transportation Policy Plan. And all the other studies here will be fully scoped in 2023 and brought to our various TAC and the TAC subcommittees for feedback. So right now, here is the draft 2023 UPWP budget. Now, as compared to previous years, it's larger. And there's 2 main reasons for that. One is an increase in funding due to IIJA, and also because our overhead rate is down significantly since last year, and in particular, years prior to that. It's 34% overhead rate this year, or in 2023, and this year in 2022 was somewhere around 88%. So makes a huge difference. So this budget does assume the funding of a few new positions, but really the result is more funds available than we anticipated for salary and consultant studies. Yeah, as I noted, it's a significant increase in funds, and as of right now, we only have 6.4 million budgeted. However, we do have a federal fund total of about 5.5 million, which would allow for a total budget of around 6.9 million. So that leaves about 478,000 remaining to be budgeted. We did talk to MnDOT and FHWA and received permission to have these remain unbudgeted at this point in time. And then we can go ahead and budget these funds either in 2024 or in 2023 via an amendment to add 477 or so dollars to the UPWP for newly identified studies or activities. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Questions, please, go ahead, member.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering on the unbudgeted funds, if there was any discussion on setting up performance measures or a study for minor local system bridges, pavement, or crashes. That was discussed at all.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. That's a great question. We have not specifically looked at that, but that is certainly something that we can consider. And as I mentioned, if we have both staff capacity and, the need and desire within the region to study that particular topic, we can always amend the UPWP to include it.
Member Geisler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Burns, so the IIJA funds that are coming in that are boosting our budget for this year, how long will those continue to boost the budget over the next period of time? And do you have, is staff planning to continue to allocate that over the years, or when there's a drawback, or if there ever is a drawback and the funding goes back down? Have you guys started thinking around that, knowing that we're only talking about this year right now, but
Sure.
this is a long range thing?
No, thank you. Great question, and Madam Chair. I think IIJA is guaranteed through, 2027. Don't quote me on that. I don't know for sure. But yeah, that is something we definitely are aware of. And as I mentioned, we are adding new staff to help accommodate that and use those funds to the greatest potential to improve our region. So that's something that is definitely well within our mind. In terms of a cutback, that part, I guess, would be above my pay grade.
Thank you.
Other questions? It looks like we're going to have a lot of report backs with all the extra studies that you're going to be doing. So are we going to be seeing you here again more often?
You'll be seeing staff here more often, absolutely.
Okay, looks like a lot of studies. So there'll be a lot of it for us to digest. So as we look at what we want to put on our agenda for the information items, I think we're going to get a lot of this coming down the way. So this is really good information and some great recommendations too. So thank you, Mr. Burns.
All right, thank you very much.
And there's no action needed on this, right? There's, we need to move this. We need to move this on acceptance.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, then the next item is the HSIP program, year extension I-35W. That's John, you're back up here.
Yep, thank you, Chair. And so this project, again, a regionally selected highway safety improvement program project for lighting on I-35W in the South Metro. The Department of Transportation is asking for basically a program year extension on this one to align that lighting with a major pavement project that's taking place a year later than the current program year. Through our current process of evaluating program year changes, this wouldn't score well. This really comes back to about efficiencies of developing and delivering projects, and that's what the department is asking for us for that program year change to move it back to be part of the larger pavement program. So.
Does anybody have any questions on this one? I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to move this.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other conversation? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Over here.
It was Hanson and Crane? No, it was Anderson. And
We're just catching the first and the second. Sorry, we got to get all this down correctly over here. You guys are pretty quick on us here. We can't track all this. Okay, so after that, we're going to move on to some of the information items. We're going to start with the Arterial Bus Rapid Transit update. And I think that's going to be Katie Roth and Kyle O'Donnell Burrows. Is that right?
that is correct, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and TAB members. I'm Katie Roth. I serve as the Director of Arterial Bus Rapid Transit for Metro Transit, and that's all the lines with letters. With me today is Kyle O'Donnell Burrows. He is the Manager of Planning within that program. And so we have a brief update for you today on the Arterial Bus Rapid Transit Network, of which TAB has made a major investment over the past several years. This is a map that many of you will be familiar with from the multiple updates and conversations we had about the expansion of the Arterial BRT network during our Network Next planning process over the last couple of years. But on the map, you can see in the gray lines, Metro Transit plans by 2030 to have a network of 8 Arterial BRT lines up and running, so the A through H lines. And those would connect the broader system of Metro, bus rapid transit, and light rail lines shown in the colors, and really knit together the highest ridership areas of our transit system with fast, frequent, all-day enhanced service. So we'll provide a brief update on the active lines in development, speak a little bit about TAB's investment in each of those, and point to some of the outcomes here, and then talk through the next steps in the program. So starting off on this slide, I did want to highlight for each of the lines, the blue bar here shows the federal regional solicitation amount in each of these projects in the program as awarded by TAB. So in total, for the program thus far, for the A through F lines, TAB has invested $103 million in these 6 lines, which in the case of the A line and the C line were really critical first investments in getting that corridor moving. In the D line formed a much larger portion of the overall budget, and in the B line and E lines led to those projects being fully funded recently through major state contributions. The F line, of course, was recently selected through the Network Next planning process, and last year, TAB awarded the $25 million Arterial BRT set-aside for that project, and we have submitted a similar request for the G line, also named through that Network Next process, for a similar $25 million award in the current solicitation. So to give you a highlight of where the projects in development are at this point in time, I want to start out with the D line, which we're really, really excited to be launching later this year on December 3rd. I hope you'll mark your calendars and come out and celebrate the launch of this new service with us. We are still working on some of those details of what that opening day will look like, but it will be a Saturday, and much like with the Orange Line last year, we're prepared to maybe put on some warm winter hats and get ready to celebrate new bus service. We've had just a little bit of construction to wrap up this year. The vast majority of the work was completed in 2021. The highlighted areas on the map show those places where we've been finishing the major construction. Right now, a lot of what you'll see on the corridor looks like this. So we've got shelters that have been installed, we've got all of the major civil construction completed, and the pylon markers are up. We're working right now on installing the rest of the features in the shelters, the customer information, the security cameras, benches, bike racks, and all of the heaters and lights and things that make these more comfortable places to wait for the bus. So as that work is ongoing, we continue to protect those station areas with those fences that you see here, and we're getting excited to complete the work and take those off later this fall. Looking forward, our next line in development is the Metro B line along Lake Street, Marshall, and Selby Avenues between the Westlake Station on the Metro Green Line extension, all the way to downtown St. Paul, right outside here. We've been working very, very closely with Hennepin County, the City of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Ramsey counties to put together a construction phasing plan for this lengthy corridor and also take into account some partnered projects and investments being led by our partners along this corridor. I do want to point out that Hennepin County very successfully pursued $12 million in RAISE grant funding for Lake Street improvements. We're really excited to be partnered with the county in delivering that work. And as a result, our construction phasing responds in part to how that grant came into this set of projects. So we'll be starting our construction next year on the portion shown in red between Hiawatha Avenue and downtown St. Paul. We'll be finishing up work in 2024 with those Lake Street improvements in partnership with Hennepin County, planning to open that line in late 2024. And when the B line begins service, it would also be using stations in downtown St. Paul being constructed by the Gold Line project, also with some regional solicitation funding in that work. So really a lot of things knit together in this really important crosstown corridor, which is our second highest ridership corridor in the region. Also, I want to point out that one of our major things we're working on right now as we finish design is continuing to engage the public, picking up from where we left off on where should stations be in some of our earlier planning work. And at this stage in the process, now focusing on here's what we think a station is going to look like, here's where we think these elements will fit into the street, taking feedback on those things and making adjustments where we can to fit better into the landscape. So this is an example of some of the graphics we're producing and engaging businesses and residents and stakeholders in the corridors. I'm going to hand things off to Kyle to speak to the next line in the program.
Thanks, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll speak to the Metro E line, which will run along Hennepin Avenue and France Avenue from the University of Minnesota area to Southdale Shopping Center in Edina. Right now, the construction is planned to begin in 2025 and has just recently wrapped up the corridor planning process. So the council in June approved the final corridor plan, which set in place the station locations and platform locations. And we are currently beginning to enter into the design and engineering phase of the project, where we will be working with project partners and station neighbors to refine the details at those platform locations, where we're really getting into where exactly should the shelter be placed within that platform and the other station amenities there as well. We'll be, of course, doing a lot of the similar work that's being done right now on B line, including continuing to engage station neighbors and producing renderings like you just saw, and continuing that work going forward. One of the key themes throughout both the planning and now into the engineering process with the E-line has really been significant coordination with other corridor construction projects led by our partner agencies along the corridor, including several TAB-funded corridor projects. And really, we are working very closely with the project leads on these projects to really coordinate with these projects and minimize the risk of rework or construction impacts in this area over multiple projects, and really maximize that benefit of the regional transportation funding investments in these areas. So this map just shows the location of some TAB-funded roadway projects along the corridor. We're also working very closely with our partner agencies on our priorities for bus-only lanes throughout this corridor in coordination with city and county-led projects along this corridor, some of these same projects. Turn it back to Katie quickly for the F line.
All right, so next up, of course, is the F-line, and certainly this is the first of the projects that we selected through the Network Next planning process, and we're really excited to be moving this forward. This project is moving through the planning process starting this fall. We're getting ready to release the draft corridor plan that would highlight where stations could be located on the corridor, seek significant public feedback on those preliminary station locations, and bring that forward ultimately for Met Council approval next spring. So we'd be planning then to target construction for this corridor starting in 2025 and opening the line in 2026 pending full funding. One thing I want to note, we've, as with all the projects, continued a lot of agency engagement. Many of the agencies represented in this room have sat on the technical advisory committee for this project. And significantly and differently from the rest of the Arterial PRT program, we have entered this project into FTA's Capital Investment Grant Program. We are planning to request small starts funding for this project. That is something that we have not done on the rest of the Arterial BRT projects, but the early investment, both from TAB and then from the state of Minnesota, has allowed us to come up with a plan for this corridor that leverages that investment and potentially brings significant additional federal investment into the region. So moving through that process, we are putting together information for FTA's review, and in doing so are also updating the budget to align with FTA's required contingency levels and format of their cost estimates. We do expect that the $80 million project that TAB saw when we selected the F-line, we do expect those costs to increase as we bring in those FTA contingencies. So that is something that, as we move through the process, we'll be continuing to monitor and communicate about. I will note that there's quite a bit of coordination in this corridor with MnDOT's planning and environmental linkages process. We don't need to go too deeply in that today, but suffice it to say, MnDOT is a very strong and important partner on this project. I will hand it back to Kyle to take us home.
So as Katie mentioned, I think one of the key themes that we are working through on the F-line is that Pell coordination. And really our goal here is to make sure that what we're planning for the F-line, isn't precluding potential alternatives that are identified through that Pell process. And as Katie noted, working very closely with the MnDOT project team, and as well as other agency partners involved in that project, as well as the Metro F-line Technical Advisory Committee. So key current upcoming activities. F-line is preparing to release the draft corridor plan in late October, October 24th, which will kind of share publicly where our recommended platform locations are along the corridor. We have that'll be the first of 3 versions of the corridor plan. That'll go through a series of public outreach and engagement steps, refining towards that final corridor plan targeted for early 2023 for the council's consideration and approval. We've got a variety of strategies for outreach and engagement, both corridor-wide and specific to station neighbors and targeted around station areas there. Our next line in the queue is the Metro G line, which will operate along Rice Street and Robert Street from Little Canada to West St. Paul through St. Paul. Planned service start is in 2027, pending full funding. And as Katie noted, we did recently submit this project as the Arterial BRT project for that 2022 regional solicitation. The G line really represents a major increase in transit service in this corridor. It's a combination of Route 62 and Route 68. And will involve a little bit of reconfiguration of those routes in addition to the planning for the Metro G line. We have just initiated G line planning now with our first technical advisory committee meeting consisting of staff from the counties and cities along the corridor scheduled for October 4th. And we're really kicking that off here now, that formal process right now. Of course, we have also been doing early coordination with a number of other street reconstruction projects in this corridor. And you can see those listed here. So along Rice Street, led by Ramsey County, and then 2 different Robert Street projects in downtown St. Paul, and then the Robert Street South project led by MnDOT. Finally, wrapping up our programmed lines right now is the Metro H line, which will be an upgrade to Route 3 operating on Como, Maryland, from downtown Minneapolis to the east side of St. Paul. So really providing that, that important crosstown style service from connecting east and west metros, as well as connecting to a number of existing and planned transitways along this corridor. We are a little bit farther out on this one, so we are planning construction planned for 2027, 2028, and really beginning the formal planning process on this corridor next year, where we'd be initiating a TAC and doing some other agency coordination on this. So with that, that rounds out our identified corridor updates, and we'll stand for any questions.
Are there questions? Go ahead, member.
Thank you. This is so exciting to see. I love it. Like, this is actually building out the transit system that we need. I do have a question about the B line, the one on Lake Street. The stop at Lake and Nicollet, are you, like, do you have designs for that that will connect to the Kmart being torn down? Or any idea of what those will look like?
Madam Chair, Member Foster, great question. You'll notice that's outside of the blue shading here.
Yeah.
That's intentional because those station platforms, we were coordinating with Hennepin County as they rebuilt Lake Street in that section. We've actually already got most of the platforms in place there.
Okay.
We also intentionally worked with the city of Minneapolis to not preclude some of those connections or future visions for Lake Street, and also thinking about how we can best maximize connections for transit customers both today and then as things grow and evolve in that location in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Member Geisler, and then.
Sure. Ms. Roth, just, can you elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned with the change in how we structured the funding for BRT lines, that you're now going after some small start funds, some FTA funds. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on how that shift in the funding model has enabled you to plan differently or maybe better or more efficiently?
Madam Chair, Member Geisler, great question also. I think in the case of, well, I don't have a great visual of that on this chart, but I'll just bring this up so we can look to this while I'm speaking about this. In the case of the previous projects, typically we went after regional solicitation funding for some of that first money in. And it was largely very tailored to a specific scope. And we then needed to build the rest of the budget around that. Starting with the $25 million set aside that provided more flexibility for how those funds could be used to buy buses, to advance construction, to do different elements of the project, coupling that with the early state appropriation that came from the state of Minnesota in 2021 really meant that we had both the flexibility from the TAB funding and the early local funding from the state in order to leverage that and seek the federal funding through the CIG program.
Question, go ahead. Oh, excuse me, Deb Barber first, and then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you to TAB. So when we did the $25 million set aside, the conversations of the work group who did, or was working on that, was we wanted to do something big and impactful for the region. I hope you can definitely get the takeaway from Katie and Kyle's presentation that we are doing something big. During the pandemic, these BRT lines really were a big part of the ridership that held, and it is definitely part of the ridership that is coming back. We just had a ridership report at Transportation Committee meeting a couple weeks ago, and so far BRT lines have had 1.4 million rides this year, which is already a 34% increase over all of last year. So they continue to grow because they provide efficient, reliable, and accessible transit that really connects the communities that use transit a lot. So I really want to thank all of you because I think having a big vision and then going through the process of Network Next, we're really building up this very reliable network of transit that is really being used and accessed. So thank you all.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll echo Member Foster's comments that this is a really phenomenal update and just a great vision for the future. My question was on the E-line. There's a comment in here that talks about bus-only lanes being advanced in coordination with city and county partners. I'm familiar with that pertaining to Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis. Are there other segments that you're also considering?
Madam Chair, Member Lewis, good question. As part of our planning process, Metro Transit certainly is not the decision maker about how street space is allocated on our city, county streets, MnDOT roads, but we have identified where those bus-only lanes could have the greatest impact. And we identified a number of segments, both on 4th and University, Hennepin and First Avenues, Hennepin Avenue South, as you noted, that we have used to help have that conversation with our partners about where their street decisions can help enhance the investments that we're making in transit.
Other, excuse me, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo Member Barber's comments about how exciting this really is, and that we really took an approach to engage community and the people who use transit. At the same time, I'm super excited about the G line, the Rice-Robert line, which goes through my district, as well as the Como, Maryland line that goes through my district. But this is a community that desperately needs reliable transit. And at the same time, we had been hearing that the Met Council wanted to cut transit service on that area, but then we went from cutting service to doing a BRT because it's really the criticalness of the reliability. And really appreciate the partnership with Ramsey County as we reconstruct Rice Street at the same time. It is not only going to provide reliable service, but it's going to transform an entire neighborhood and connect our northern metro to southern metro to really great jobs and opportunities. So just want to celebrate that for a moment and thank you for the partnership.
Other comments? Go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Gary Hansen.
My question is in regard to the H line. My understanding is that Route 3 service improvements were applied for this cycle, and the project was declared to be a non-BRT project. But the proposal would implement routing and frequency changes that are part of the H line, which is planned to be open within a year of when solicitation funds are available. The current solicitation rules state projects that deliver elements of a new ABRT line are not eligible for transit expansion. And I think this would also apply to the F line and the G line. Could we get an explanation of that?
Madam Chair, Member Hansen, I might look to MTS staff to provide the response on that one.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, TAB members. Cole Henniker, Met Council Planning staff. We did a review of the application, and because the project doesn't have any elements specifically of a BRT component, there's no stations, there's no technology, there's no branding, there's no buses. We determined that this is like an interim improvement to build towards future improvements in the corridor. And the overlap actually for timing, and Katie might need to speak to this specifically, they will operate the entire regional solicitation application ahead of implementing any specific BRT service. So it's sequential, not overlapping and not duplicative, but it's just like testing a new service before you bring BRT online to make sure that it warrants BRT service. So I think that was our interpretation of the project that's in the solicitation packet for this cycle. Anything to add, Steve? Yeah.
So may I
Follow-up?
follow up with a question then? So if funds are awarded for Route 3, is the plan to continue operating the route according to the grant application for 3 years, even if the H line begins, or would these solicitation dollars go toward the new ABRT line that will replace Route 3?
Madam Chair, Member Hansen, the intent of that application in the current solicitation is for Route 3 service, and the intent is not that that would be used for H-line service. We're still working through the service planning process, so what exactly is the mix of Route 3 local and H-line service in that corridor when the H-line opens, but certainly doing so with an awareness of the grant dollars being needed to be spent on that Route 3 service.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other follow-up? Any other questions or thoughts? It sounds like we have a resounding expression of gratitude for all the work that's gone on here. And I think it's thanks to the board here for the wise choices they've made in moving BRT forward and all these other lines. So I want to thank you for coming up and making your presentation and keeping us abreast of what's coming down the line and answering our questions. It's nice for you and Kyle, Katie, to be here and help us understand this and answer our questions. So really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks. Yeah. I just have one more comment that doesn't have to do with you, but it has to do with just in BRT in general. First of all, very, very pleased with the service and through the metro region. I just want to say that one of the things that I have noted through this BRT service is that it would be nice if BRT looked at the scope in a different way in the fact of some of the ADA requirements, the mobility, the safety improvements, the signal improvements. And what I mean by that is currently the funding funds the quadrant where the transit shelter is, but it doesn't fund other accessible areas down the corridor at times. And so it's left to the locals to fund those kinds of things, or the county or someone of that sort. And it would be nice if we could find a way, because that's sometimes something that is unexpected. We don't realize, and if we really want to look at safety, and if we're talking about safety, and right now I see safety as a huge issue because our injuries for pedestrians and for bicyclists and fatalities are increasing greatly, we need to make sure that we have safe corridors, not just, the quadrants are nice, it's nice, those improvements are great, but it would be nice to expand that and expand the scope of the work so that we did it along the corridor, so those people who need those safety features have them to get there to the quadrant itself. So that's just a recommendation that I have on this. I really appreciate all the hard work, but there's always little nuances that we could look at to try to improve upon, I believe. So that's the comment I had. Any other comments on that? Okay, we'll move on to the Regional Solicitation Investment Outreach Tool. So, and that's Bethany Brandt Sargent.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Chair and members. I am here following up on the introduction we did for this survey back in August. And I'm going to start with the best news. We got 560 responses, which is great for a very short survey that we had open. We did get quite a few responses from the general public. Almost 80% of those responses were from people who have no connection to our process or to transportation from a technical component, and then a whole bunch of other different groups, including transportation committee and members of this board and our TAC and funding and programming and planning. We have quite a few advocacy groups from all over the metro that participated, and then neighborhood groups, district councils, and elected officials. So that was really great. I will caveat that by saying the survey was an opt-in, so you do tend to see the biases of people that like to participate in transportation planning and not necessarily a very representative approach to survey work. That said, that's how most transportation planning engagement is done, and I think we do have some really good results that we can take into consideration. Here's a map of where we received those survey responses from. We were able to weight them so that the weight of each individual response was proportional to the population of their county. And so that, we feel, gives it a more equal footing to both Hennepin County, who represents a significant population, but also Scott County, Washington County, Carver County, where we saw fewer responses. And here is the top line. We did ask people to allocate their budgets and how they would want to spend across the 3 modal ranges and within those projects in those modal ranges. And so for people who are in the process, so including TAB, TAC, and the committees, they spent about $50 million in roadway spending, which is slightly less than the modal midpoint range. And the general public spent a little bit less for transit. Everyone was very close around that modal midpoint. To me, the most interesting part of the survey responses were that everyone, including those in the process, spent more than the top line of the modal range for bicycle and pedestrian. So that indicates that there is a little bit more demand than the funding range would allow in that pedestrian and bicycle mode, and that's also representative of where we got a lot of applications this cycle. The second set of questions that we asked was about modal priorities. So if you had to spend money in these categories, where would you spend it? And This was done so that people who would not spend any money on roadways would have to consider that, or people who wouldn't spend any money on pedestrian facilities would have to do that. And so again, trails are a hugely popular priority in that bicycle and pedestrian. We do see 30% about spent their money or would spend their money on roadway reconstruction, and that was the highest in that priority for roadways. And transit expansion was the highest priority, very similar to both in-process and general participants. We do have data available by county, but because of the disparity in response rates, we elected to provide these budget overviews by the Thrive land uses. And so we consolidated them into 4, so rural, suburban edge, suburban, and urban. And I do have a map towards the end that can show a little bit more defined where those are. The interesting thing about this is that when you look at the roadway category, you see all of the Thrive land uses except for urban spending a lot of their money on roadways. And I think this is indicative of the fact that that's where a lot of the increased growth is happening. In terms of the percentage of their population, they're seeing much faster growth than they've been able to keep up with. When you get into the urban, you see transit and bike and ped facilities increasing in terms of the budget. For the roadway priorities, again, we see a lot of demand for strategic capacity in those fast-growing areas, which I don't think anyone would be surprised with, but within the urban and urban center areas, you see a little bit more distribution across those non-capacity projects. For transit, the suburban edge, and rural areas really prioritize travel demand management more than I think we would have expected. And in the urban areas, you see a lot more transit expansion. Bike and pedestrian is very similar across the board, a priority on the multi-use trails and bicycle facilities. And so here is the map of the community designations, and you can see how they are distributed. Most counties have some element of urban and suburban, and then suburban edge and rural. So it's pretty well spread out across the counties. And these are the key takeaways that we found in the survey. So suburban edge, and rural areas are seeking much higher levels of roadway funding. The transit modal range is about right. So we're right within the middle of that modal range that TAB assigned. And then there's higher demand across the metro for bike and pedestrian facilities. And so all the land use types except the suburban edge allocated their money above that modal range. And so I think that is the end here, and I will take any questions that anyone might have.
Questions or comment?
Yeah, thank you,
Commissioner,
Madam Chair.
and then Member Foster.
My question is, now that we know this and we've got the input, how are we going to use it? How are we going to change our scoring? How are we going to do a release for fundings and RFPs so that this doesn't just get lost as another survey that we did?
Thank you, Member and Madam Chair. I think I would caution using this as like the driver of how we move forward. However, there is a UPWP project to really reimagine the solicitation after this round. So that is part of your question. I think it is up to this group as to how they want to use these surveys. And part of that could be through implementation of a funding scenario or something like that. But we are looking for more direction on how to use this in a way that is beneficial to the work that we did and to the members of the public that participated.
Member Foster.
This is a question. If you look at the community designations map, and this might be a question for the room. So there's the urban area that is right above 169. Where is that? Like what city or?
Can I get back to you?
Yeah, that's cool. Or if anybody else knows, I don't.
I think that's Crystal.
Crystal? Okay.
Cool. Probably.
Could be Champlin.
Champion's on the river.
We're 694,
I'm not sure where
169 are? Is that-
Yeah, the upper sort of top left corner,
Yeah.
or not top left, but like,
This,
The intersection of 169 and 610, just to the south of that.
yeah,
That would be Brooklyn Park.
Brooklyn Park. Osseo, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you to the broader group.
I know we don't have enough cities on here sometime to always get our bearings, and if you don't live in those metro areas, you don't always know. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Commissioner Look.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just reading here, then for Anoka County, there was 21 responses, if I'm correct.
yes, I believe that.
21 out of 360,000 people. But if you take the 560 responses, divided by the 3.6 million, is it 3.6 million roughly population of the metro area? I think we have a .00015175 return. And so I appreciate the comment that we should probably use this as the driving force behind decisions that we are going to be making here for our modal range percentages. So I'm looking at this and I see, you know, from what I understand, and I got a call from our county engineer because he was, you know, kind of concerned that there's a big push for transit in Anoka County when in fact we've seen transit cut back in Anoka County by Metro Transit and others. So you have the operating agency reducing transit in Anoka County while people are saying they want transit in Anoka County. I suppose that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to cut it back, but it makes sense that they may be asking for it if it's being cut back. But the reality is that, you know, as you touched on, when we have a lot of expansion of housing, for example, every community, it's within their interest to sell building permits. Every single mayor, council member in here understands that's a revenue source, okay, for their budget. And so every house produces 2.5 cars or whatever the number is, and those cars drive down these roads and the congestion, you know, hits peak levels and your roads get scored at an F level, I think, on a lot of the roads that are up there. So, so when I see these type of numbers kind of promoting something other than what's necessary, I too, not just my engineers, but I too get a little alarmed by it. So I'm looking at per your last key takeaway slide there, you say that roadways needs more money, transit's about right, bicycle and ped needs more money. Is there any recommendations on key takeaways on where this money might come from or what percentages should shift to try and accomplish these key takeaways?
Member Look and Madam Chair, I don't know that that's my place to make a recommendation. I think that's how you all interpret these results. Going back to your comment about the transit, I would say that transportation engagement tends to bring out people who are upset about something. Sure. And so it would be, it seems very realistic that if you're experiencing transit cutbacks, the people that participated in this survey might have been affected by those cutbacks and are now looking for an opportunity to influence the system. And so I think when we do engagement, we need to be careful about all of the voices that we're hearing and trying to understand what their true concern is. A survey really isn't a great way to do that, but it does give us a starting point for how we look to our communities for what they actually need.
Commissioner, are you?
No, I'm good.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on that. So do you think that there's an opportunity, given that you're saying this isn't statistically sound, there was some missing voices, people with disabilities, race, gender, equity. Is this an opportunity to build off of this and maybe do a more statistically sound survey maybe for the 2050 TPP and start planning for that in advance so that we could use the data? Because right now this is interesting, but if it's not valid, it's not valid, right? So is there a way to go to the next step to make it valid?
Thank you, Member and Madam Chair. I want to caution us from saying it's not statistically significant because that's a totally different word in the world of surveys. It is not representative of our population. And without really intentional engagement, reaching out to those populations who aren't involved in our processes, I think that's where you get to that level. The TPP will certainly be doing that. And during the next regional solicitation cycle, we can be a lot more, we can look ahead a lot more to understand where we need to engage and the proper tools that we need to be using to create something that's more representative. But I also don't want to be disrespectful to the 560 people that did this survey and say, it's not representative, it's, you know, a very poor turnout, but we do appreciate when people participate and people make transportation planning decisions on a lot less than 560 people providing comments.
Who else? Oh, it's Member Geisler.
I think I want to point out, though, that since the time I've joined TAB, both as an alternate now, which is getting on 3-4 solicitations now, I do find it interesting that this survey represents the conversations we're having at the table, though. Shifting funding here, what do we want to invest in? We feel we're doing all right here, maybe a little less there. So, while it may not cover all the bases that we would typically want for a robust, we're going to make decisions off of survey, it does seem to indicate the conversations we're having, which as a citizen member, and the majority of people responding to this are citizens, I do find important to represent. And so while I respect, you know, our engineers and our county and our elected officials, you have 3/4 of the people responding here are people who aren't elected, who are expressing their will. And I think it does indicate a desire to go deeper and have a bigger conversation about this, because it is representing what we're talking about at this governance table as well. So I hesitate to say, okay, it doesn't cover everything, let's not consider it that way. I think it's a good arrow to point to. We should go further down this path and figure out more.
Go ahead. Member Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things for those around the table. As you know, we look back all the time and look what worked, what didn't work, and then look forward to as to how we want to actually do the regional solicitations into the future. So we believe like in 2023, 24, we'll do that process just like we did when we kind of revisioned things this last time, leading into 2025 and 2026 solicitation rounds. And then also, as you know, we have a TPP work group. With this time, we very intentionally engaged a number of members from TAB because some of those conversations, like I said, we've been having around the table are somewhat reflective in those results, and really were reflective almost in the types of applications we got. I mean, we got a lot of trails and bike ped applications. We got a lot of transit. We got a lot of that more rural suburban roadway applications. So it's somewhat reflective. But there was a very intentional step taken with this TPP process for the 2050 plan, was to make sure we had some of the voices here, because these are the conversations. We all represent people and are having the communications in our communities, and that's what we really want ultimately to be reflected in that process.
Go ahead, member.
So I had two observations. One, as a survey research professional, my entire career, I would like to say that representation has not been assessed here. We don't know that it's not representative. We don't know that it is representative. It's just what it is. My larger point is, I thought this was a wonderfully creative way to try to get engagement from the public and the community about these topics that we address all the time, but in a kind of a more technical way. But the tool that you developed was, I thought, really creative and really nice. And I just wanted to say thank you for putting the work in to make that happen. It was great.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. Just going to listen to the discussion here. I think 2 points. First of all, in Anoka County, our website is our largest facility, you might say. Gets the most traffic, the most visits. A lot of people, when they're trying to find information, they go there. So I think there's some possibilities we can work with our counties to put information out there, respond to this survey type of information. I think that's a pretty easy way to get people to respond. A lot of people are going there. So the other thing is I think it's valuable to say, to present real-life scenarios, such as if there's a roadway expansion that needs to be done in a particular county versus a trail or bike ped project or whatever the case is, say, would you rather have this or would you rather have that? Let people make a decision. I think that puts things in context, because if you say, well, I like this, but I'd rather have that, that's different than saying I like both or I like one or the other or whatever the case is. So I think that there's ways to try and dig down on some of that information to determine what's a higher priority than everything is great. So.
Other comments or questions? I think you've gotten a lot of really great feedback. I think I can summarize some of this. I think a lot of people like the idea that we did a summary. I think we'd like to see better further outreach around equity in other places, outreach tools. You know, timing and involvement of the technical committees can help us with this. So I think people are generally along the same platform of this. I think everybody liked the fact that we were trying to engage people. But I think we do know that this was a small survey, and it also, the responses were especially small around the collar metro counties, and I think those really matter to us too. We need to keep in home, because as those collar counties do grow, they will have transit needs, and we need to listen to those folks, and there weren't maybe enough voices there to give there were small voices, small number of voices, so I think that's what I heard around the table. I think we really appreciate your hard work, and we'll look forward to when we move the next survey along, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're running really well on time. Nobody leave your seats. This is the great conversation we're coming up here, right? I'm setting you up here, Steve.
You are, thank you.
The regional solicitation project ranking and funding scenarios here, so take it away.
Good, thank you, Madam Chair and members. So this is the first of 3 months of discussion on the regional solicitation potential project list, with November being the action item coming to this committee. So we've got plenty of time. It's a slow process on purpose, so everyone can have a chance to weigh in at all levels of the TAC process. One of the takeaways we wanted to bring to this group is we have more money available because of the new federal bill, IIJA. So usually we had about $200 million available for the solicitation. Now, this cycle, we have $300 million. So quite a bit more. Shown here, we did include over-programming of about 9%, which is actually shown on projects. Typically, we were doing about 10 or 11% over-programming. We cut that back a little bit to give TAB a little bit of wiggle room if there's a project that's next on the list that they want to see funded. At the same time, the new federal bill brought about 2 new programs that are coming directly to the MPO. One is called On-System Bridges. That's for bridge rehab and reconstruction projects. The second is a carbon reduction program, CRP. And those are, we'll talk about how we're proposing to deal with those, and especially want to get some input from this group on the carbon reduction, but not shown to projects. So first, on-system bridges, about $4 to $5 million per year. Because we do have a bridge application category in the solicitation, we've put that new bridge funding towards those projects. It seemed like a clear connection to do so. However, with carbon reduction, we've got 2 slides here. With carbon reduction, the eligibility is very similar to the CMAQ, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program. So there's a very wide swath of potential projects that you could use for this new program, carbon reduction, including some roadway projects, certainly all transit projects, and almost all bike ped projects. And then additional projects like electric vehicle charging stations and, like I said, a wide variety of potential uses. At the same time, as this money's available really right now, 2023, we do have a lot of planning work that maybe hasn't caught up with the money. The state of Minnesota is required to do a carbon reduction strategy that's due within 2 years of IIJA being signed, so that's November of 2023. So those work groups are just starting, so that, like I said, the planning work is catching up here. The council is doing 2 studies, one transportation and climate change multimodal measure study that we're starting right now with a consultant, TDM study, travel demand management study that Cole from our staff is leading, and others that would be good inputs to think on how to think about this money. So two policy issues to bring to you, and then also we're bringing it to the Transportation Committee here on Monday. The first of which is our current regional solicitation process isn't really well suited to measure carbon reduction. We do in a couple of the categories, that being transit expansion and the travel demand management. But most of the other categories, we aren't specifically measuring carbon reduction across those project types. So we don't have a good measurement tool. Some of our studies we're doing right now potentially could feed into figuring that out. At the same time, we have money that's available right now. What we're hearing from MnDOT is start thinking about what to do with especially that earlier term money. But they would like us not to spend 2023 through 2027, that whole $41 million, until the statewide planned carbon reduction strategy is completed, and to see what the best use of that funds is. So, certainly you could put it into the regional solicitation and some of these projects. You could come up with another process and say, we think the best use for carbon reduction would be to fund X, Y, and Z. And then staff would develop a process through you to select those projects in the future. So it's kind of a short-term problem. We got money available now, and then kind of a midterm, what would this group and others want to do with carbon reduction money? To date, we'll go through two different solicitation scenarios. We're calling them funding scenarios that we also brought to the TAC group. The first is what we're calling the midpoint scenario. So remember, TAB approved modal midpoints for each of the different modal areas. So that midpoint of that range is what we're calling midpoint. Those have been around for a few cycles. That's 55.5% for roadway projects, 30% for transit, 14.5% for bicycle pedestrian. And then within those categories, we allocate money based on the number of projects submitted. So that's a proxy for what the demand is for, say, multi-use trails versus safe routes to school and pedestrians. We allocate that money within bike ped based on how many projects were submitted. So that's option number one. Option number two that we're bringing to you today for discussion is called the bike pedestrian heavy scenario. It's shown in orange on your tables. This responds not only to the high application count. We received 69 applications in bicycle pedestrian, but also the public input that Bethany just went through. People across all geographies thought that making more investment in this area was something that they would like to see. So what does that do? Obviously, there's an opportunity cost to doing that. So it goes to the top of that bike ped range, which is 20% of the $300 million. It shifts about $16 million to bicycle pedestrian and takes it proportionally out of roadways, $11 million, and transit, $6 million, as shown on the screen. So those are the two, and one of the key questions that we're going to ask of you is, do you think you can work with these two scenarios over the next 3 meetings, either combinations of what you see here or the two that you have in front of you, or would you like staff to go back and come up with another conceptual scenario? We would develop it and bring it back to this committee. Next topic is unique projects. Again, TAB set aside $4.5 million last cycle for unique projects. Several of you from this committee are on our scoring committee for unique projects. So most of the application categories are scored by technical scores. In this case, the policymakers wanted to score out those projects. And so we're having the second meeting of that group. And hopefully by the October TAB meeting, so the next TAB meeting, we'll come back, or that group will have a recommendation for you as to how many of those 3 projects you can fund. So we do have money available for all 3. So the question before you will be the opportunity cost of do you think all 3 are worthy, or would you rather put that money back towards other capital projects and go further down one list or the other? So again, here's the sketch.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, clarifying
Super
question,
quick, and
please.
maybe I missed it
Yep.
here. Of those 3 projects, which are they all road, are they all transit, or are they combination? I mean, how does that $4.5 million line up against the other categories that we're talking about maybe modifying?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. So the 3 projects, I don't know if I have them off the top of my head, maybe Cole can tell me, but they aren't road projects. Typically, they're projects that couldn't easily be submitted in the other categories. That's why they're called unique projects, because they had trouble either scoring or weren't eligible. So they're not the typical capital projects. One is an expansion of EV charging, I know in East St. Paul. Another one is a
travel demand management type study in the 30 lane, maybe you remember that one?
Mobility hubs.
Mobility hubs.
Okay, okay, thank you.
When you say, it's not a study, it's an information campaign.
That's correct, yep, it's not a per se capital project, it is a, yep, you're on the scoring committee too, Commissioner Lurick, so. So that will be one, when you and others meet in October or before October, those are the things you have to consider. You want to fund all three or put some of the money back in the pot.
So
Well, just to
if I
say,
might,
if I could say quickly, fund all three versus fund some or none. There's a possibility of funding none too.
Yes.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
thank you. So then when we're looking at these dollar amounts and percentages and midlines and everything, that 4.5 million isn't accounted for at all in those figures, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Cool. Ms. Elaine?
Just to add to that, that was funding that was set aside from the last solicitation.
So again, we'll come back to these after I think we'll go through the scenarios first so people have a good lay of the land and then come back to what do you think of the funding scenarios that have been developed? Do you want other ones? And then also want some input on, again, that carbon reduction program on what to do in the short term and the midterm as well. So Greg, if we could switch over to the tables, the other PDF.
And then I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
You mentioned you used the number of applications submitted as a proxy for demand. And I'm seeing, is there maybe a discrepancy in the count of applications versus the absolute cost of those projects? Are those looked at differently, or are we strictly looking at count when we're trying to determine demand for each of these categories? Yeah,
thank you, Madam Chair and council members. So the way we've done it is based on the number of applications. It's been argued kind of back and forth, and there's good arguments on both sides. The reason we did it this way is because it doesn't disadvantage the smaller projects. So if you do the total dollar amount requested, it tends to lean heavier towards the bigger projects just because they're requesting 7 or 10 million at a time. So that's why we've done it that way. That doesn't mean it's the right or wrong way. That's just the approach we've landed on. Good question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now on the charts, I just want to make sure people have a good sense for what's shown here, and then you'll get more comfortable with them over the next 3 months to be able to kind of keep weighing in on especially the last couple of projects in. So with 300 million available, we are funding. I think it's important to note the top projects across all these application categories are going to get funded. So that's, I think, a positive trend with having 100 million more. The first 2 pages are showing the roadway application categories. And we've put a few things on the table. It's maybe a little daunting, all the data we put on there, but if you look at the applicant column, and I'll just circle it here on the screen, as we get to, especially the last few projects in on each of these scenarios, it becomes a little bit more of an art than perhaps a science. Kind of the projects are lumpy, there's a little bit of money left, so there's a few other things that we look to as when we think about the last few projects in. One of them that we have in this case, we have in each application category, we mark what the safety high score. So whichever project in that list had the highest score for safety, and that's one topic we've heard a lot about in the last few months at TAB. We mark that down so you can consider that. If a project was resubmitted, a TAB member I think requested that last time. Some of these projects are being submitted 2, 3, 4 cycles, and they're just below the funding line. So if a project's been resubmitted several times or more than once, we note that here. And then lastly, if the project was awarded equity bonus projects in the equity measure, another topic we've talked a lot about here at TAB, that is also shown. So all 3 of those scenarios are shown on the screen here. Resubmittals, the safety high score, and the equity bonus projects. So the column is what you're going to want to look at. So again, we have the two options, the midpoint and the bicycle pedestrian heavy. Look at the number of projects. So you can see in traffic management technologies, in both cases, we're funding 3 out of the 4 projects. And another thing we look at is the scoring differential. So on the far right side, you got the total score. And that's another good indication as to should I fund kind of the next project
or the next two, or is there a clear gap of 200 points here that there's a clear distinction between the quality of projects or how they were scored? So the total score is another kind of leading indicator as to where you should go with some of the money. So scrolling down here slightly here, Greg, so I don't know if I can do it or not, but yeah, I can. So on spot mobility and safety, again, those are small intersection projects. We're showing both cases here of 6 of the 10 projects, so about 60% of the projects that were submitted are being funded. Strategic capacity, here's where we've got a difference. Again, strategic capacity is the interchange projects and lane expansion. So in the midpoint scenario, we're funding, again, 6 out of 11. We have a close score at between 5 and 6, a 1-point difference. And the project number 6 in that case is the equity bonus and resubmittal. So we wanted to give you 2 good options there. In one case, we funded 6 of them. In the other, bike ped heavy, we thought a good comparison would be to fund 4 of those projects and put the money elsewhere. But funding 2 that were 1-point difference seemed to make sense. I'm going to scroll down here. Roadway reconstruction, 31 applications submitted, and we are funding anywhere between 16 and 17 out of the 31 projects, depending on the scenario. And then lastly is the bridges. Again, we're using the new funding source on-system bridges and funding 4 out of the 5 bridge projects that were submitted in that category. The last thing I wanted to pay attention to is way at the bottom, there's a yet to program row there. And in some cases, there's a little bit of money still left over that we haven't assigned to projects yet. So we didn't want to put all the money if it didn't kind of have a clean break point. So in a few cases, we're going to get some input from this committee and others as to what those last few projects may want to be, either for geographic balance reasons or for other reasons that you want to consider.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
For some of these funding ratios, and I'm trying to think about the most precise way to ask this question. Is there a goal, because we have these ranges, which I'm assuming are historical, and I don't know how far back we're looking, but do we try to keep a consistent target year to year, or are there technical matters that make those ranges bump around as much as they do?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and council members. So the modal funding ranges are based largely on past funding decisions of TAB, I would say. So TAB does put forth quite a large range, which you can kind of work between, and even TAB has the discretion to go outside of those ranges, so you're not bound to those ranges. But the midpoint is largely based on what we funded in the past, at least by mode. So it has some history there. But I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think for this reason or that, TAB can make a decision to go up or down within that mode or even outside of it.
Maybe a different way to ask it would be 30 years ago, we may have invested much more in highway expansion compared to the needs that we have now. So that would attribute, that 65% range, top of the range. Whereas, in recent time, maybe we'd be prioritizing bike ped and transit a little bit more. So I'm wondering if, that low 46 is more reflective of kind of a modern need, or is it on a year-to-year basis, just the makeup of TAB has a much more direct impact of that? Maybe that's not a clear way of asking that, but.
Member Payne, maybe I can help you with that
Yeah.
too. It wasn't that many years ago that we actually reviewed all these modals, and we had it took us a year's time to develop these. And yes, we do modernize them from time to time, and we have been playing with this scenario just for a short couple of solicitation periods to see how it plays out. And in the future someday, it will happen again, and we will again look at needs and where we want the future of the metro and the outer ring counties to head, and we will do some more of those kinds of scenario planning, and we may move things again. But at the end of the day, if things aren't quite balanced, or if we feel like somebody has kind of been slighted in a project, or a project really needs to be funded or something, we have made some last-minute switches from what the Technical Advisory Committee has brought before us for a lot of various really great reasons from my colleagues sitting around the table. So we do have discretion here of how dollars are spent, but yes, the ranges have been set with a lot of technical work behind them.
Thank you.
Elaine, you wanted
I can
to?
add on. What TAB has done is set up the ranges by mode, and with taking that, staff then took that and then just distributed it within each mode, in each of the categories. That is where TAB has had more discretion, where they wanted to have more emphasis on the type. Staff did it by starting point, number of applications submitted, and then TAB can take it from there.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Are you?
Okay.
So this is where I get like super confused. There's two projects in Dakota County, one that has been resubmitted a number of times. That's a pedestrian bridge at Cedar and 140th Street.
47th, right? Yeah.
And then Apple Valley resubmits their bridge that they want at 147th Street.
Yeah.
In past years, the Dakota submission is always scored higher. It continues to score higher, but like 1 year we put it in with the BRT category and it wasn't funded because there was a limit of 2 projects in that category. So I don't know, I mean, I can't give you the whole history of where it's at in which category, but I mean, I'm looking at these 2 projects again, and the Dakota County, one of them is under multi-use trails and bicycle facilities. It has nearly double the points, but doesn't show up as being funded with the other one that's like, 400 points or something. I mean, the disparity in the points is huge in what we're funding versus not funding, and I'm just, how do we reconcile that?
Yes, Madam Chair and Commissioner, there's a few points maybe we should make on this front. The total points available are 1,100, and our technical folks will say too, we caution people against comparing one application category to the next. So a score of 500 in one category might be an equivalent good project to a 350-point project. Within each application cycle, you're scored against the applications that come in the door. So you're not scored against a metric or a standard. You're scored against whoever else applies that cycle. So that's maybe some reason for the deviation of going up or down or flip-flopping. And also you have different scores and different measures each time that you might be scored against. So it's, you're asking, I guess, against a project that was submitted in transit modernization versus trails. And it's up to the applicant to maybe in that case choose which one they want to go into. And some are more, as we're finding out, more competitive than the others to get funding in. And in this case, we're going to be funding almost all of the transit projects based on the money available in that category or in that modal funding range.
And I guess my point is these are 2, like, almost exactly the same thing, 7 blocks apart. Okay?
Yeah.
And to have that much, and again, last time around, it didn't get funded because of a limit of 2 in a particular category. So I'm just confused. It doesn't make sense to me.
Elaine, did you want to jump in?
In each application category, the measures are different too.
Yeah.
So that would be.
Right. But I guess when I look at this, when I look at even within categories, some of them, every single project would get funded. And in other categories, you'd have to be in the top 30% to get funded. And so in other words, in certain categories, the lowest of the low in getting points within that category, just because the virtue of how the money's distributed is getting funded, not how they compete against other things. That's my point.
I get it. I understand.
If you good, I think there's some good observations there to take
No,
note of.
there are. That's good to point that out.
Continuing on here, so again, this is the 3 or 4 transit categories on this third page here. Transit expansion, again, because we do have that increase of money of $100 million, and the commissioner's pointing this out, we're able to get all the way down those lists and fund nearly every one of those projects in both transit expansion and transit modernization. One of the rules that we discussed at the TAC level was the Brt Rule, and a few people alluded to that here today, that there's a maximum of, within the competitive categories, a maximum of $7 million that Brt projects could take. And I think the spirit of that rule was that people didn't want all the money going to Brt-related projects and nothing going to traditional local bus service. And that was put in place maybe two cycles ago. Chris and others here were involved with that. Here we have $100 million, so what we did ask of TAC and what we'll ask for you to concur with here, they did say that we should be flexible with that because we do have a lot more money available, so sticking to that $7 million cap for Brt projects when we're gonna be running all the way down that list, maybe doesn't make sense, but again, that's a rule that TAB was involved with, so we do want to get some input or concurrence if you agree on that front. It does perhaps change the last project in that we fund. So there is, and depending on the funding scenario you go with, it potentially will have an impact on the last project in. So so that's something to consider too, but our TAC level people are saying we should be flexible on that rule.
I do have a comment on that.
Can I just, not to bemoan the fact, but had Dakota County submitted under transit modernization, it's always scored higher, the 140th Street Bridge than 147th. So it would have been funded.
Yeah, I
I mean,
understand.
it just doesn't make sense. Maybe we have too many categories, I don't know.
I might second that one.
I wanted to talk about the BRT and the flexible spending and everything like this, and I'm not necessarily against this, but what I would say in that is something that I commented earlier about, which was fully funding and scoping some of the ADA needs and the signal needs and the safety needs along the corridors. When we look at that, it would be nice if we could do some of that as well with those dollars, rather than just the quadrants where the shelters are, so that it helps the impact that's going to have, because there's always a shared cost to cities or counties who have to do that and that impact. And so if we have extra dollars that could be used for those kinds of things too, we would make safer streets, safer roads for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for cars. And also, when you think about it, if we make it more accessible, then it's also, better for the climate, because people are going to take them, because they can use them. So just, that's a thought that we had. And I'll go along. Mary Giuliani.
No, finish up.
Good. I'm done.
I kind of, as I'm pondering Commissioner Holberg's comments, well, part of it is just, as we, we as an entity are involved and staff's involved and we know what happens, but then as we change percentages, as we change criteria, as this year we get extra money, I guess my question is for applicants, how do we get them that information? Are we providing support to them to help them determine what's the best category to apply this solicitation cycle? Because it changes. And so maybe that's something we look at so that these things aren't, so we don't see these kind of results. Because we do want consistency. And I do like that we have different categories as we talk. We've always cautioned we don't want so many that we're watering it out. But maybe one of the things we look at is just how are we supporting applicants as we are involved, we know what's changing. How are we supporting them to get it in the right category for that solicitation cycle?
I think that's a really good observation, Member Giuliani. I think that's very true, and I know we've had conversations before along similar lines on that some of the counties have higher levels of staff that can produce some of these grants and others don't, and that maybe make a difference. So.
We do, when the applications go out, we do provide a workshop for the applicants and then also training for submitting. And I'm a resource for the questioning of where they should apply. And this one actually did reach out to me, and they switched categories because TAB increased the maximum for the pedestrian category from 1 million to 2 million.
So they were playing their odds. What do
Yeah.
you do? What do you do? Yeah, okay.
So it was a higher cost that they could then apply in that category, so they switched.
Did they know the additional money was coming from
No.
at the time? See, so, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, the other piece of information we give to applicants is you approve the modal funding ranges. So we do that on purpose ahead of the application period so people know roughly how much money is going to go into each pot. In this case, we have much more than we thought originally, but that was a decision that this group made collectively to tell people where they can expect and how much money is going to be going to the different areas.
And again, and also based on the last couple cycles of the solicitation, TAB has funded all the pedestrian and safe routes to schools projects.
Yeah.
So I think they thought their chances were higher there. Geisler.
Okay, Member Geisler and then Member Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question and a couple follow-up items. So one, the projects that we're seeing highlighted here are inclusive of the 9% over-programming, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So anything that's yet to program is that you're indicating at the bottom of those sections are basically, we have a 2% reduction over programming, and then we have this yet to program kind of gap in there. So it's a little bit, we've been showing over programming though previously, and now we're continuing to show over programming is already bucketed in here, correct?
Right, yeah, we thought putting it in the modal funding ranges into each of the transit, bike ped, and roadways was better to do up front than maybe at the end, so that the decision that you made early on, the money would go to that modal area. So, yep, in some cases, there's still money available in these columns.
Okay, and then second question here on the BRT classification, we get to a more specific item of the BRT rule, if you will. So proportionally, how much extra money pushed into these categories from IIJA relatively to what we typically would see there? 50%, 60%, broad strokes.
Yeah, for transit, the midpoint is showing here at 89 million. And I bet we were at 55 million or 60 million last cycle. That sound right, Cole?
So 40, 50-ish% more. So even if we did, if we applied that basically a proportional step up on the BRT to say, if it was 7 million, we're gonna step that up by the same amount of extra money that went in basically to maintain the spirit, but still hold to it to an extent. That would be something we could consider. But beyond that, I do agree that from where we generated that rule from, the intent was to essentially make sure that BRT didn't steal the entire pie just because by its nature, it scores well, it does well, and so we wanted to make sure that we weren't starving the rest of regular transit. So I mean, given the depth of projects that we're funding here, I think that the intent is met, regardless of the specific number that's there. Some broad comments in history on that point.
Okay, and Member Payne?
Yeah, maybe more basic question. What's the most common target of our discretion here? Is it trying to look at the funding target per scenario, or is it at that like project by project basis and advocating for fully funding bike, pedestrian, fully funding transit, and that adds up to whatever the
Well,
total
there's
cost
people
is?
here with more tenure than I have, but I know it's been geographic a lot of times. But perhaps Elaine, can you elaborate on that as well?
TAB has, since 2014, they've been staying near the midpoint. But again, that's each TAB that does this every 2 years, that's their discretion. Part of it, they were looking at geographic balance. And I know if they moved a little bit off the midpoint it was to get a project in an area that was not funded. So that has been more when they looked about moving. And again, it's, between each of the category, or applications within a category, that sometimes helps with that decision. And in this case, I think, we haven't talked about the geographic balance, but every area is covered because there is more money. So it's gonna be up to the TAB members to say, do we want more, say in the roadway category, more reconstruction and shift the funding? And that's what staff is looking for TAB to, what do you want to see? Do you want to see these scenarios maybe adjusted or a new one off the midpoints? So TAB would then give the direction to the staff to develop more to consider.
There's a lot of meat to this. I think you should spend some time on this, and you should go back to your staff. I'm actually going to be sending a memo in on this. I'm just going to tell you that, because there is a lot to this, and there's a lot of questions that maybe you haven't. I've already started conversations with my staff at county, so I would definitely say, I just have one quick question, Member Barbara, and I'll get to you. I had a question, though, going back to bridges and how your funding scenario actually is set up with bridges. I know that we have the IIJA money, but is that in addition to the money that we already do? Are you replacing that with IIJA?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and members. So in the case of the bridges, again, for on-system bridges, we're taking that new funding source and essentially replacing what was there. So we did have a target, as you remember, of $10 million for bridges. So instead of using that target, we're bringing in the new money, which is that $4 to $5 million a year. And so we're getting an additional bridge there, so an additional $5 million, but it isn't per se over and above that $10 million target, if that's your question.
Yeah, that's my question, and I guess my druthers would be, I think the intent was actually to add to the bridges, as we've seen across the country with the issues around bridges falling across the country, our 35W, unfortunately. And I know that my colleagues around the table here have aging bridges as well that probably need replacing, that wouldn't make the list otherwise. And I think about my outer ring counties who probably have that more because they use roads more, even more than us. But certainly Hennepin County has that as well. But I would like to see that back in there, and in addition to, I think that was the intent. That was, I'll go to Member Barbara and then to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick comments, and especially as we're getting close to wrapping up some of this discussion for today. For some of the comments on the ABRTs and the additional infrastructure around them, often our practices has been to really do those projects in collaboration when there's a big road project and things like that, where we can build those things in partnerships with the counties and the cities. That has worked out very well historically, and I think, it's even just getting the funding together for the ABRT part of it can sometimes be a challenge, as we've heard. We've been able to do some good things, but we can certainly have further conversation on it. But I will tell you that I think that's why we've really done those when the counties or cities are undergoing big projects as well on reconstructing some of their local roads. And then just another thing, as some of you are going back to talk with your staffs about some of this, one of the key things to keep in mind is this carbon reduction amount that has gone in. In the long term, we'll be able to build something into the regional solicitation that has scoring criteria. We don't have that this time, and so we have to look at it both from the short and the long-term perspective as how we use that money and where it's going. So I just encourage you to have some of those conversations as we look at how best to utilize that money in the short term for this solicitation.
And we don't want to lose it. We want to make sure that we're spending on something, and it may not be on this. And I've got another question over here. Go ahead, Doc.
Steve, it seems like, I'm thinking back, we used to have 7 funding scenarios, at maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever. Getting this down to 2, I think, is smarter. I think we've worked our way toward this. These 2 seem, maybe due to the excess money or extra money, more closely aligned than they have been in the past. Is my sense of that correct?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Member Anderson. So, that might be the case. We did go, for the bike ped heavy scenario, we did go to the top end of that range. But for instance, I think you are correct. When we used to do like roadway heavy, transit heavy, those ranges are bigger, so you probably did see more deviation of kind of differences between the scenarios. I think you're right on that.
So, kind of thinking this through and then taking the comment about the bridges, we've almost fully funded that bridge replacement category. Were there other projects in that I mean, I'm assuming these were all the projects that came in under that. So if we end up with a over-programming, I mean, or projects drop out for some reason, we could certainly fully fund that as a discretionary move after the fact, or, you know, if we pick one over the other and you know, say one of the projects that drops off one of the other funding scenarios, we could probably pick and choose there as well then. Well, we wouldn't have to go back to the well and start over, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Member Anderson, I think if the committee wanted to fund that last bridge project, to get another bridge project, we could accommodate that with the scenarios that you have in front of you. Yep.
We don't have a study that shows which way the birds are traveling in this picture, do we?
They're swirling, yes, yeah.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, just quickly, I am hearing that people can't hear that are watching online, so if you would speak into the microphone, not you particular, but anyone that's speaking today.
Make sure you're in front of a mic, please.
There. Chris, can you pass
Commissioner.
it down?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll speak up too. So I heard when you opened your presentation, you had some questions about what scenarios we would like to see. And I want to answer that question and get back to Member Barber, who raised the point of we have carbon reduction money to allocate. And so what I'm wondering is if you could come back with a scenario that potentially we connect carbon to our trails and requests, because we have a big list that isn't funded, and that potentially that carbon money could be used for the trail request, so we can get some of those projects out the door in the short term. So I wanted to ask that potentially. I know staff is looking for direction. I would like to see that kind of scenario. And then my second question, not really related, but again, I don't know where else to raise this, but we have started to see now member appropriated earmarks coming from Congress on many of these projects. We approved one on the consent agenda today to accommodate. And where I'm wondering is, so that I believe like 10, 15 years ago, we had to do some cleanups from leftover earmarks that were partially funded and projects not complete, is that where in our scenarios are we taking, when we take that money to do projects, if there's some way of scoring so that we keep in mind, hey, this money, we received funding and we have to finish this project, because I think earmarks are gonna stay for a while and we want to keep bringing that money in, and there would be nothing more offensive to take part of it and then never complete a project. So I don't know where else to plug that, but it feels like we need to plug that in some of these funding scenarios.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
A quick question on the bridges, and I don't know if I'm confused, but I think you said that the total number that was originally planned was for about $10 million for bridges?
Correct, yeah.
And then we had an additional 4 to 5 with this project, with the new money. So it looks like that money is actually included in this bridge scenario. So you have upwards of nearly $15 million allocated. So the bridge money wasn't just simply replaced, it's been added onto in this scenario?
That is correct. We used 3 years of that new bridge funding pot, so, you know, 5 million times 3, so that's why you see 15 million there.
Okay.
The other years are for 23 and 2024, which it's too soon to develop a brand-new bridge, federally funded bridge project. And so not to get into the details, but we'd have to use it on existing bridge projects, basically, that money.
Okay.
Okay, Member Foster, and then.
Hi, thank you. I have a question thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question under the travel demand management category, and I just want to make, are we at that point, or?
I think all things are on the table to discuss, because at this point, I think we've all kind of gotten into the weeds here. I don't know, going through this table is going to help us, so I think we understand the table.
Gotcha.
I don't think we need to keep going on that.
I actually do have a question on it. I just want to make sure
That's
I'm
okay.
reading it right.
Go ahead, Member
So
Foster.
it's gray under all scenarios. Does this mean that all scenarios are funded, and then under the midpoint and bike ped heavy, the Move Minnesota and Dakota County would also be funded? Or none of them are funded except for those two?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Member Foster. So what we're trying to show here is, again, this is a set aside from last cycle because these are near-term projects. So the gray projects would be funded with that set aside.
Great.
In addition, you would have the discretion to fund those last two projects and for $900,000 if you want to.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
So-
Commissioner.
This gets to my point. So you're asking about what we want to bring back. I know some of these very low scoring projects, okay?
Sure.
And I can see that, and not all BRT is the same. The red line is anemic. Before its frequency was reduced, its per passenger subsidy for 7 miles was higher than the passenger subsidy on North Star, believe it or not. I mean, I don't support either of the pedestrian projects as being good investment of taxpayer dollars. This lowest travel management thing, it's one chamber that serves a subset of the county. Every time the county board has discussed this project, they have not supported it. We have not supported the Apple Valley project. I'm wondering if there is a way to bring in a performance standard so that you would have to at least be in the top 70% of the score, or, I mean, it kind of feels like we're gonna give money to the projects that got Ds and Fs within the category, in a real simplistic way of explaining my concern here, and that if we're accountable for how we spend these federal funds on projects that have real needs and are robust and have real value, then why are we going to the bottom of the barrel because you landed in a particular category or not? So that's my concern, and so I don't believe that either of these two options address that concern
Okay.
for a funding scenario.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To that point, I think it's, maybe to just be really succinct, projects are graded on a curve. The top scoring project is setting the bar. So if you've got somebody who's really excelling in the class with you, even if you've got almost everything right and are doing a great project, you're graded against something who's doing it may be perfect or the best. That changes every year. You could have a project, the exact same project with the exact same metrics, with the exact same people, having its score change based on who it's competing with, because it's a competitive process. So whenever we start questioning the scoring process and the points that are allotted and where things are going, this isn't the time that we should be doing that. We should have done that back when we had this discussion on where do we want to weight which areas of these sub-items when we do the project conversation. We shouldn't be talking about specific scores, relation, and performance level when we can see the projects in front of us. That should be a governance level thing abstracted around who's getting what money. Because otherwise we're doing it and we get into parochial conversations. The one item I do have that I am concerned on scoring has not specifically about sub-items or where's the bottom or where we at. What I start worrying about is when we're seeing scores on the top scoring project that's only hitting 70%, that's where I start wondering if we're measuring the right thing. That would be something that I would want staff to go back to say, I'm looking at spot mobility specifically. When we get to the scoring revaluation for the next solicitation, if we're only getting 700 points as the top scoring project, are we measuring the right things? Are we doing that the right way? Because it feels like we should be using the entire score category, especially since most of our projects, most of our categories have an 850 to a 900 scoring project as the top funded project, which gives me a sense that we're measuring those appropriately.
Yeah.
So those are kind of my two comments on scores of just, we need to look at how we're measuring the project specifically in those sub items as a board to say, are we comfortable with how those points are? But how the points shake out, how the scores did the work, and we trust those scores. We know who they are. They've been doing this for a long time, a lot of them, and so we have to rely on their technical expertise on the project scoring here.
Thank you. Member Rowe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe just to build on both of the last 2 points, it could just be helpful to board members, especially those of us who are relatively new to it, just to have a little bit more of a recap on the scoring process itself, not to quibble with any individual scores per se, but just to understand kind of the components which make up the scores within each category so that we can understand how the proverbial sausage was made. I think that might be the kind of thing that would provide a lot of clarity to folks and give folks more comfort in terms of how these allocations come to be.
Can I just make one counter?
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with your I agree with that, but when there's money to score every single thing that works if there's not enough money in the pot. But when there's more money than there are applications and every single thing gets money, then then we're funding the worst of the worst just because of the money that's in that pot.
Okay, all right. So there's a lot here to take in and everything like this, and I have a couple of comments I wanted to do. One of the talks was about the HSIP and the regional solicitation and receiving applicants can receive more than one award. And one of the things I just wanted to bring out is that, really our rules don't support allowing this. So that would make us need to do a rule change if we wanted to somewhat double dip. So at this point, I don't know in this part of the scenario if we want to do that, if we want to take that for another time, so I just wanted to make that kind of a comment.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that question we will bring up at funding and programming tomorrow.
Okay.
I think that would be a good
I
discussion
appreciate
for the
that.
technical staff.
I appreciate
Weighing
that
in.
too.
Yep.
And the other one is about awarding more funds to partially funded. I'm concerned about it setting a precedence because we haven't done this in the past. And so there is a lot of other dollars where we could use in other places, I think, that have been pointed out by my colleagues here. And then I'm wondering, because I think there's been a lot of good comments around the whole carbon issue, which I think we don't want to lose the dollars. I think everybody agrees on that. Maybe TAC could look at that and come back with us of how to short-term get this spent into something that really has some kind of a carbon hook to it, so we meet a criteria of some sort until the report comes out and tells us where and what they want to spend it on, after 2023, in November of 2023. So I know we don't want to lose those dollars. There's got to be projects we could use that on, and so let's not lose those dollars. So I think that would be, is everybody in agreement? I see heads shaking here. I think those are some concurrences about that. Other concurrences and things? About things, Deb, Barbara, and then I'll go to
Madam
Mr.
Chair, this is
Member
just
Duquesne.
a quick almost side note, but I want to catch it before people start taking off. Our staff, with the conversation about scoring, said they'd be willing to have like a scoring workshop. So that way, if people wanted to come and attend, we can open up, we could potentially even see if we can do something virtually, because it's not an official kind of meeting, so we could come up with something like that. So we'll work together to come up with something and send it out to the group, and that way, because those of us who've done this a while, it's still complicated. So, it's always good to get a refresher, so we'll get some info out.
Yes, Member Duquesne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for Mr. Peterson. Does the IIJA restrict what the carbon reduction funds can be used for? In other words, we certainly don't want to waste the money or give it back.
Correct.
But can we take it from X to Y, and they're not even related to carbon reduction? Do we have that authority or discretion? Or in the bill, I should say?
There is some transfer, Mr. or Madam Chair and Member Dugan. You can transfer some of it, but there is a wide array of projects, and many of which are in the solicitation that are shown on the screen here that we could use it for. So just like the bridges, I think the intent of the money is to use it for projects that would reduce carbon. So doing so, I think, would probably be prudent, and there's a lot of project types that could do that, as shown here.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm not usually one to speak for Bike and Ped. This will be the first time I've ever spoken.
Mark it down.
On behalf of that, since I've been on the tab, so mark it down. But there are it seems to be a lot of good projects there that aren't funded, that would fit this carbon. So I just call that attention to that.
I think a lot of folks would concur with that, and I'll go to Member Geisler and then to Member Barnes.
My short comment on the carbon reduction program is I don't want to see additional work created for applicants. I think a separate process or policy to manage that money long-term is way more overhead than we want to put on staff and people
At
to do it.
this time.
I think
Agreed.
integrating it into the regional solicitation, short and long term, is the more efficient method and use.
Okay. Member Barnes?
Yeah, Madam Chair, this, I've been listening on the discussion, and this has really been good around the normal solicitation and the additional money that's kind of coming in that we know about and setting the framework. And this wouldn't be a scenario that we gotta, I'm not putting this out as a scenario, but as a discussion point here is we're kind of in some different or unprecedented time for the unknown, the grants and different things that are going through. And I mean, we face the challenge at the department of, okay, we got the regular money coming in, so we're, looking how we're dealing with that, but there's so many of the unknowns, and when others are going for grants, they're trying to package things, whether it's local funds, the normal federal, the solicitation process is definitely a great piece to it. And it was brought up when we talked about over there about member designated funding. That's really one that's a potential smaller piece of what's really out there of, and so far Minnesota is starting to bring in and get more grants, and this is still one of the bigger unknowns of not knowing who's applying, where they're going to be successful. So to me, as I think of these and some money up front, is what are some thoughts of some of the money earlier to be put towards getting projects to be very competitive to get grants to do it. So there's, most of when we look at these, granted, there's some studies and there's some of these are early phases, but a lot of these are carrying the project to completion, when as a state, I think, when we put our mind to it and put together the right applications and all the partnerships that we do, we are very competitive with it. So again, with funding coming in, how to set some aside, or, like we try to have it where we do have a set aside. We have a mobility that helps with kind of matching some of the things that are here. So it's not specific to this, but as we're talking about, it's maybe going back to, we have a lower project that's physically getting funded 4 years out, would that even be better to just take some money set aside and say, let's start getting some plans to go in for competitive grants, because there's so many opportunities. So I don't have an answer as far, to me, so it isn't a scenario to this, but as we're trying to do this within our organization, there's so many opportunities to leverage, but so much of it is around planning and getting the right projects in the queue that have done some work that enough that you can deliver it. And the hard part here is we're picking the years out that they actually, we were talking about IIJA, but the money that's already been given to us or being allocated, not the unknown grant potential. So just a comment, Madam Chair, I don't know
Correct. That's really insightful, because let's face it, these dollars are coming down the table, and let's make sure that the projects we have and we get in here, we can execute too. So, and who was, Commissioner Look.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak a little bit here to geographic balance. We have a slide that wasn't covered, but it's in your, a few little ways down. I'm not sure if it was going to get covered or not, but essentially by county, it says your percent of population, and then if you go over to the far right, you see kind of the total percent of dollars received since 2014 to 22. And of the counties listed there, I would note that Anoka, Dakota, and Washington are under, the percentage of population to the dollars that are received. And there's possibly some reasons for that, depending on the number of funding categories. Some counties might be more competitive in some areas, while equally competitive in other areas. And therefore, case in point is if Anoka County applied for transit funding, we probably wouldn't be very competitive, but if you look at the strategic capacity, we're top scorer. So, counties that would be competitive in transit and strategic capacity might therefore get more money over time. And so I think it's important to identify that each county has very real different needs than other counties, okay? And that can be identified in dollars that are given over the years and or the percentages that are on here. But, when we're talking about extra dollars that are non-programmed, I think someone brought up, possibly putting in more roadway categories. I would be supportive of that. Simply from the standpoint that I know the governor did an analysis here back when he was, advocating for an increased gas tax. I believe it was $8 billion. I'm trying to recall I can't remember what happened yesterday, but this was a few years ago. It was a significant number of projects that are out there that needed funding, and therefore his advocacy for the gas tax. And so we still have those looming projects that are out there. You know, they're not going away. Matter of fact, they're getting worse every single winter. This might be a way to help correct some of that geographic imbalance, to utilize some of those extra programming dollars to try and address some of the roadway concerns that the governor actually brought up. It wasn't more than 2 years ago, I think, so.
Okay, good. Great point. Great point. Do others have other thoughts that they want to, or are they waiting to go over this some more and come back with? We do have a timeline here of a couple of months, I believe. We're going to review things next month, is that correct? And then in November, we have to vote on what we're going to accept on this. So you've got this right up here.
Right, thank you. And Madam Chair, the other question, I didn't hear a kind of a firm response, was, are there other funding scenarios that this group wants to see? I heard some concurrence, I guess, on using some of the carbon reduction money, and maybe that's similar to another funding scenario. So using some amount of the carbon reduction money to go particularly down that trail list. And that's probably where I'd maybe
I think that was
summarize
what
it.
we all heard. I think that's a pretty good idea.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mayor Winchell.
Can that money be split if you had a project that had, say it was a road project, which 90% of them have some sort of trail, pedestrian, could some of that money be shifted there and leave more for roads?
You mean on the trail on the road project with it?
Yeah, so could you take some of that, don't know the right word now, but can we take some of that money for carbon reduction and use it in some of these projects? You're using it the same way, but you're scoring it different.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And John, are you going to come up here and give us a little bit more
Madam
insight?
Chair, yeah, I think short order is from a funding standpoint, it's useful for, we can say sidewalks or trails or that. Now, when you start parsing out money for particular needs for different projects, that becomes now a whole nother level of work that's required on the project side to track that those dollars are only going to those components and that they're only charging to those funds, those sorts of things. So it becomes a little bit more of
Kind of
an
an
onerous
administrative
process for
nightmare.
the project developer.
All right.
Thanks.
We want to move this quickly. Go ahead, member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question, if maybe it's something that staff can do. I know we have all these different buckets of money that are coming through. I mean, again, like the bridge, I think is a good example. The extra money came in, but it's not necessarily obvious when you're looking through the actual list to see like, oh, now we have this extra project or two at the bottom. Is there any way that staff could indicate that under the different scenarios, that this is the money that came in from this different source? Because I think what we're getting at here is that we have the baseline money that was coming in, and then to Mike Barnes' point, we have this additional part that's coming in that's very tough for us to understand how that's adding on in the different scenarios. So that might be something that'd be useful for us, especially as a the conversation in October for that.
Madam Chair and Member Johnson, I think that's a great idea and something we will bring next time.
Okay. That will be helpful, so we'll bring that back. So when we have conversations in October, we can have that. Any other last words? Looks like you folks, if you want to look at this some more, you have homework. And I really appreciate it. Thank you all for sticking around, first of all, because this has been a long meeting and it's almost 3 o'clock and you all stuck it out. So I really appreciate it. And I know I'm not Jim and I don't have the humorous anecdotes, so so I appreciate it. So you folks have a great rest of your month and I'll see you in October.